Hi, I'm Zach Walsh. I'm a research associate at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam, Germany, and I'm a PhD candidate at Claremont School of Theology in Los Angeles, California. I'm going to be presenting a short, about 15-minute presentation today on case studies of the urban commons, which I originally presented in Seoul, South Korea on October 15th. One reason why urban commons are increasingly relevant is because more than half, about 55% of the human population live in urban areas, and that's set to increase by 2050 to about 68%. So we've only really just begun to tap into the potential of this new situation. One of the potentials is that resources are much more efficiently managed in cities as opposed to suburban environments. And so we could move a lot further in terms of our sustainability efforts if we started to manage resources according to the commons in urban areas. Another reason is that as of late, national politics is often moving in a sort of regressive direction and is not very supportive of some sustainability initiatives. And the converse of that is that a lot of responsibility has devolved to the local or municipal levels. So city governments are increasingly responsible for advancing sustainability, and at the urban level, we see a lot of new initiatives that are actually quite progressive, which is hopeful. For those who aren't aware, the commons are sort of categorized in 4 different ways according to this schematic. We might think of the air, the water, the soil as material commons that are inherited, but we might also think of cultural traditions, religious traditions, different languages as immaterial and also inherited commons. Another category is produced material commons, and we often think of, for instance, public safety like fire, police, libraries, which everybody has access to. And we can also think more recently of digital commons like open source software or Wikipedia. All of these things are commonly shared and managed, often self-organized, and also should not be privatized for that reason. In order to make that possible, Elinor Ostrom developed several principles of governance to effectively manage them, which are outlined here in the slide. One is the first principle that the commons should be bounded in some way so that it's clear what is included and excluded within the commons. Then they should be adapted always to local contexts, which allows for cultures to define the rules for the commons and how they should be governed according to local tradition and local knowledge. Number 3, commons should also be democratically governed so that everybody has mutual buy-in and a way to raise issues and govern the commons according to their own ideas. Number 4, there should be effective monitoring devices to understand how the resources are being managed and whether or not infractions are happening, which leads to number 5. If violations in the community occur, there should be sanctions to monitor and manage the commons so that they are not free riders. Number 6, there should also be conflict resolution mechanisms that allow for conflicts between parties to effectively resolve themselves in an affordable manner. And number 7, generally the higher order levels of governments, say nation states or the United Nations, should recognize the self-governance of locally defined commons so that there aren't conflicts at a higher level. And number 8, there should also, in the case of, for instance, the atmosphere or large-scale commons, be different nested layers of governance to manage such a complex arrangement. In the case of urban commons in particular, there's some research on what allows for effective urban commons, and these 5 principles give some guidelines. Often the urban commons are involve an interesting mix of stakeholders between government, business, and civil society. And the first principle discusses how these different stakeholders can be brought together in common arrangements to govern a resource that is of mutual interest. Number 2, there should also be an enabling state that sort of supports and promotes the establishment of cooperative or commons-based governance. within a region. Number 3, there should also be a pooling of resources, both social and economic, across the different stakeholders within an arrangement. And number 4, the urban commons should be experimented with and iterated over the course of time so that it's always changing and adapting to different conditions. And finally, number 5, often urban commons incorporate digital technology and digital resources, but there needs to be also a very clear understanding of tech justice so that the ways in which technology afford communication across groups is distributed equitably and that everybody has equal rights to their own data and to the use of that technology and the benefits that come from it. Here is a graph that just documents the sort of mega trend that is becoming the commons in terms of the research publications. You can see a sharp increase that has occurred over the last several decades and is continuing. Within the sort of subdiscipline of urban commons research, these are the more seminal works that I would suggest anybody to look into if they were interested in learning more. A few to sort of just point out, the Commons Transition Plan for the city of Ghent is quite unique in the way it describes how a city coordinates various initiatives to create really commons-based governance structures within at a municipal level. Also, the Catalan Integral Cooperative, there's a report published by P2P on that initiative, which is especially interesting because it is the CIC, Catalan Integral Cooperative, is a group of more than 100 different cooperatives that are part of an association that grew out of the financial crisis 2007 and 8 to create a sort of solidarity economy, which provided for the needs of people who otherwise weren't being provided for after the crash and crisis. Also, similarly, Jackson Rising documents an impoverished area in Jackson, Mississippi, where people came together to create their own solidarity economy and provide for their own needs in a self-determined way for both social and eco-justice. I recommend that book. And Carving Out the Commons is a nice bit of research that describes the commons at the urban level and takes as a case study an urban housing cooperative in Washington, D.C. Another initiative that's worth looking at is the Co-City Initiative. And according to this map, you can see that there are more than 100 co-cities around the world located in different geographic regions. And you can go online to find more information about those. But basically, the cities in these different areas are incorporating commons-based strategies for governance at the municipal level. And in the remaining portion of this presentation, I just want to highlight some particular case studies that come from this piece of literature called Sharing Cities, which is just published by Shareable as a collective effort that several people came together to publish case studies across the world in which commons were applied to local municipal governance. They highlighted case studies from all different sectors, which is really interesting. And I'll pick out one or two case studies from each of these sectors. The sectors are housing, mobility, food, work, energy, land, waste, water, technology, finance, and governance. The first case study in housing that I found particularly interested was that Egypt has had cooperatives since the beginning of the 20th century. Established within their housing sector. And it's really reached large scale so that at the current juncture, sort of 80 million people are actually housed within cooperatives. And it's had so much success because private enterprise developers and also the government are very supportive of cooperatives. So much so that also now the national constitution requires the Egyptian state take care of cooperative associations by providing discounts on land and tax exemptions and loans that are favorable to cooperative enterprise. Another case study is this housing cooperative in the Netherlands, which is intergenerational. It takes students who are in college who can't find affordable housing and often housing that's in good condition, and it pairs them with seniors who need the attention and care that comes with interaction with younger people. So the way the scheme works is the assisted living housing cooperative actually provides free housing to a select number of students who are in need, and in exchange the students agree to spend a certain number of hours every week with the elderly who they're paired with, teaching them skills like social media or email, and taking care of them. The Safe Motos initiative is a commons-based initiative in the sector of mobility, and it's addressing the issue that African countries in particular have about motor safety in a very innovative way. So what they do is they've developed an app on their phones that tracks the speed of the vehicles, the location of the vehicles, and gives the drivers a rating to improve the safety of the driver. And in exchange, it allows the driver to hook up with people who are in need of rides, almost like a taxi service. So people who use the app know which of the drivers is safe and also is quickly connected to a driver who's affordable and safe and efficient. Similarly, in the Department of Waste, this initiative takes care of food waste, which is a huge problem across the world. About, I think, about a third of food is wasted because of problems with it spoiling or imperfections in the food. And so they've developed this app to connect people who are businesses who have excess of food with people who are providing for people who are in need of food. And so they connect the two up and distribute the food to those who otherwise would put it in the waste bin and give it to those who are in need. Fab Labs is a global phenomenon that is short for fabrication labs, and it's basically built on a model of global open source dissemination of knowledge and know-how and local production methods. So it's very environmentally friendly, and it creates local economies that can produce their own goods using these globally open-sourced methods of design and research. In the sector of energy, there has been lately the increasing privatization of municipal energy sources, and as a reaction to that, there have been several initiatives, most notably here in Germany, that have reclaimed for the public those energy resources. And so there was this political initiative that started in Hamburg and has spread around Germany that has allowed the public within that area to reclaim first for them. It was the electrical utilities, and then now they're also reclaiming the water utilities. And this has allowed them to also actually invest in sustainable consumption and production of energy, whereas the energy companies that privately owned their sources of energy were not invested in new renewable sources. So this is also very encouraging for sustainability. Another example in the sector of energy is from Denmark, where people have cooperatively organized to own the wind energy resources in that country, because it's very expensive to produce wind turbine, and the companies again who privately own energy in that country and elsewhere aren't invested in investing in the new sources of renewable energy. So, and at the same time, the individual has not enough capital or money to invest in something as large as a wind turbine. So what they've done is they've formed cooperative associations to pool their resources and then to buy the turbine and distribute the benefits from that. "596 Acres is an initiative in New York. It started in Brooklyn, actually. Just a woman saw an empty piece of land that was about 2 acres and wasn't being used. And she reclaimed the land from the city and started using it as a community space and created an open-air theater, an urban garden, and a research lab. And she's since replicated this across the city by identifying of all the different areas in the city that aren't being used. And she discovered that there were 509 acres of unused land, and then pairing the people in those neighborhoods up with the city government who, or the owner of the property, so that they can reclaim it and use it for community purposes. Another initiative probably many people may have heard about, which is global, is the Repair Cafe, which pairs people who have a product that isn't working with people who can fix that product so that they don't put it in the waste bin and buy something new. And so this limits waste, but it also creates community connections between those who can repair something and those who are in need. In the sector of energy, another example is this one from the Netherlands, where water management, which is becoming an increasingly problematic issue in an era of climate change, has devolved from the national government in Netherlands to the bioregion. And so each of the different areas within this bioregion have created councils for managing the water that is separate from the national government, so it's not dependent on sort of four-year funding schemes and party politics. And at the same time, it gets funding from the local housing owners in the area who benefit from the management of the water system in that bioregion and who pay into the system. This is an interesting initiative that's in Germany, but also around the world. It's created mesh networks. And mesh networks are internet networks that are created between wireless routers. And so those who don't have access to the internet, who aren't paying an internet provider, can still access an internet at a local level by wiring up wireless routers. And so these activists have put hundreds of routers atop buildings around, in this case, Münster, Germany, to provide sort of universal access to internet for whoever's within that area. SpaceHive is in the sector of finance, an initiative that provides local people within a community the ability, the means to pool resources together to fund community projects that they will ultimately benefit from. So it's just a crowdfunding operation that allows people within a given area to fund a project. And there's a monitoring system to make sure the project succeeds so that they then both have buy-in but then get the benefits from the project at the end. And so it's a sort of distributed, decentralized crowdfunding mechanism for local initiatives. And the last case study I want to share, which is one of my favorite, is Block by Block. So the software developer in Sweden who developed Minecraft partnered with the Swedish government to develop a program for participatory planning. And often the problem with development around the world is that there are typically developers, usually often with also state support, who provide sort of top-down plans for communities without involving the community within the planning process. So this software allows for the sort of feedback between community members who will ultimately be using whatever's developed and the developer in a sort of software design that allows for the community member to tell the developer what they need and how they would like to design the environment. Here are some of the sources that I've used in this presentation. You can find them on my academia.edu page. And here is my contact information. Feel free to email me anytime, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thank you for your attention.